Good morning, Susan.
Good morning, Kieran. How are you today?
Not too bad. I'm shocked as usual, I guess, with speaking to so many victims of the brutality of the police in Ireland and just the whole judicial system, the way it has left down so many different victims. And it is just unreal to think that a country that considers itself to be so progressive in so many different ways
Mm.
and that we've all these victims, hundreds of victims. It's absolutely staggering. Uh, could you tell our listeners what exactly happened yourself? Start at the very start of your relationship with this person to where you are today.
Yeah, so I met my husband in the early 90s. My parents went to London in the 60s and had me and my brother and sister, and they moved back to Ireland. And on one of my visits back to see them, I met my husband, who was in the military police in the Curragh. My mum and dad had bought a little shop there, and that's where I met him in there. So I went back to London because I was a manager of an estate agents in Wembley in London. And we had a kind of a long distance relationship for a little bit. And it was decided eventually that I would move over. And I moved over to Ireland full time then. And we got married. And we had our son, Sean. And whilst I was pregnant, this is when the domestic abuse started. And I've been told since by trauma counsellors for domestic violence victims that that's a normal, well, it's a common time for domestic violence to start when the woman is expecting her first child or whatever. Um, and that's when it kind of started, and it started very slowly, mild in comparison to how it ended up. And I just would give him chance after chance after chance. And before I knew it, I was a stay-at-home mum, full time with my baby son, and things just got very, very serious. And I was being beaten quite regularly, physically, as well as psychologically. And my name wasn't Susan, it was Whore, because all women were whores. And when I tried to leave, I was told that he was connected to everybody and he knew all the guards and he knew all the social workers and he would have my son removed from me. And I have no doubt whatsoever that he would have been able to manage to take my son away from me if I had left. Um, and that's really how it all started.
Can you uh, can you tell us about um, as it went on after you had your kid? What was the breaking point? When you, I remember you telling me about one of the last assaults that he carried out on you, the physical injuries you actually had from that.
Mm.
And of course, when you started to report it, what was the response from the authorities regarding that?
Yeah, so there was a lot of serious assaults over the years. Now, serious assaults, as far as An Garda Síochána are concerned, a serious assault needs medical intervention for the injuries. A minor assault is kicking and punching, apparently, and that has to be reported within 3 months of it happening. Otherwise, it kind of dissolves. But I was seriously assaulted by him many times, and one of them resulted in my spine being fractured. Obviously, every time I went to get medical help, he was there. And as he's 6'3" and quite kind of, he has a quite a demanding aura about him, and people will automatically feel quite nervous in his presence. But any time that I went to get medical help, he was there standing over me and making sure I didn't say anything, basically. But I remember I remember the first time that he beat me up very, very badly. Um, I had a very bad chest infection at the time and I had a very high temperature, and our son was around 6 to 8 months kind of region, able to stand up in the cot. And he was going through a stage of waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and that was his morning and his day was ahead. And of course, this morning I just literally couldn't get out of the bed. I had lost a lot of weight, um, because Sean didn't sleep at all throughout the night. He would wake up every hour or so. And I just said to John, can you please get up? And when you go to work, because we were living not far from the Curragh, would you mind getting up with him and just give me another 2 hours and then I'll be able to carry on for the day? And I got a hurl of abuse, F off and blah, blah, blah. And I said, you know what, you are some selfish, lazy bastard. That's what I said to him. And as I was getting up to put my dressing gown on, he flew out of the bed. He got hold of my shoulders and he kneed me in the stomach. I fell down to the floor and he kicked and he punched me while I was down on the floor. When he finished doing that, he got back into bed, put the covers over his head, and I crawled out onto the landing and lifted myself up on the banister and then went into Sean's room and got him and went downstairs. And I remember looking at Sean and I said to him, we will get out of here one day. It's going to be very difficult because I didn't have a very supporting family, to be quite honest. My father said to me, made your bed, lie in it. And my mother was too interested in going socializing with her sisters and her friends to help in any way. So I knew I was going to have to do this alone, and it was very difficult. I had no access to money because I was a full-time mum, and I had no access to his salary. And I knew that it was going to take some time, but I didn't think that it would take nearly 20 years. And in that last year, so this would be in 2016, there was a point where I was in the kitchen and he came in from work and he stood in the middle of the floor. And as I said, he's 6'3". He's a big, tall guy. And he was just in the way while I was trying to cook dinner. And I don't know whether this is relevant or whatever, but I'm going to keep talking. And if you don't want to hear it, I can stop. And I just said to him, please, John, will you sit down at the table and eat your crisps, because you're standing in the middle of the floor and I'm trying to go from the fridge to the cooker while I cook us dinner. And with that, I never forget it, because he put the packet of crisps into one hand and he had steel tip boots on at the time because he was on site in the job that he's in now. He goes to building sites, so he had these steel cap boots on, and he lifted his leg back as if he was going to kick a ball in a football match, and he just kicked me right in the front of my leg, right into the front of the shin of my leg. And I remember just turning off the pots and pans. I didn't even cry because I'd been so used to it for 20 years of being treated like this. And I just went upstairs and I sat on the end of my bed and I just said, I have to get out of this. I can't do this anymore. My son was older at this stage and he was starting to attack him when he was talking to me the way he did and treating me the way he did. And he used to regularly shout around the house how my pussy belonged to him and that he would have access to it whenever he wanted, because that was his conjugal rights. So, of course, my son, being older at this stage, was starting to attack him. And then the two of them would be fighting, constantly. Well, not fighting, because obviously Sean was trying to help me. And I knew I had to do something. But I also was very aware that he had a lot of Garda friends in the area from his days in the military police. And I knew that there were favors done over the years on both sides. And I know the way these guys work. They call in their favors if they're in trouble. I remember Gardaí and soldiers and people like that come into the house, but I wouldn't be privy to their meetings. I would just leave tea and biscuits and go off and do whatever I needed to do. But I knew when I went, that if I was going to leave him, and I was attending the local refuge for about 2 years before I even made my move, because I had to be sure that the safety order with the court was going to do what it said on the tin, because if it didn't, I was going to be allowing myself to go into another realm of abuse, because abusers do not like it when you stand up to them, and they especially do not like it when you report them, especially when they've got friends that are Gardaí. So between Women's Aid and my local refuge, who I was talking to for years, they said to me, Susan, your safety order will do what it's supposed to do. This is modern Ireland now. We don't allow those things to go on anymore. There's none of this corruption and covering up and all this kind of stuff. And I said, right, if you're really, really sure, I'm going to go in and get this safety order. But I really, it really has to work, because I know what we're dealing with here. This man nearly murdered me several times. So I went off to the court and I was awarded my court safety order. You're given a 2-inch box to write the reasons why you want a safety order. And this would be an application form with 4 A4 sheets in it. But this tiny little area, you have to put in a reason. So I had to condense 20 years worth of serious, violent and sexual abuse into that tiny little box. So I went in and the judge read it and he said, "Okay, is this true?" And I said, "I wish it wasn't." And he awarded me a 3-year court safety order. He said to me, "If he does or says anything to put you in fear, I want you to report this to Kildare Town Garda Station, any of these breaches, immediately." And I agreed and I said, "Yes, okay." And off I went. Within 48 hours, I got my first of 32 threats. And this was, "You fucking whore. I'm going to make it my career to destroy your life in every way possible. I'm going to turn our son against you. I'm going to destroy your business. I'm going to make sure you end up homeless and on the side of the street with nothing and no one. I'm going to destroy your family." You know, it just went on and on and on. And straight away, I did what the judge said to me, Judge Zidane in Nace Court. And I went to Kildare Town Garda Station and I reported that threat. And the guy who answered it went, "No, that's not a breach." And I went, "Okay, but I'm in fear. And you know, I've got a job where I have to go to people's properties." I was a self-employed estate agent at the time. And I was doing quite well, and I had started up 2 years before, and this was giving me the confidence to go and do something about the situation that I was living in. And so, you know, obviously, if I'm going to people's properties, I don't know who's behind that door. So it was really important that the safety order did what it was supposed to do. I went to Kildare Town Garda Station and they said it wasn't a breach. My father said to me, "Go to Nace Garda Station because they're slightly larger. They might have more of an understanding of what a court safety order is." And I thought to myself, well, on the back of the safety order form, it's written in one paragraph what the court safety order is supposed to do. And that is that it's supposed to stop the person who has it from being in fear. And that's quite simple, really. I don't see anything complicated about that. But anyway, I rang Nace Garda Station and I gave them the details of the breach, and I was told someone would phone me back. Nobody ever did. So it kind of went like that for the entire 3 years of the safety order. And I was being constantly threatened with having the house burnt down, my office burnt down. At one point, I was told that my body would be chopped up into pieces and sprinkled over the Wicklow Mountains, and that no one will ever find me. And it just got harder and harder for me to work. I was leaving my
Yeah.
home less and less.
What happened then when you contacted the police? You contacted GSOC, and you also, I believe, that you reached out to the Minister for Justice and
Mm.
you reached out to Simon Harris, correct?
Yeah, that was afterwards. So this was up to 2018. So I had the safety order for 2 years at this stage, but obviously it was being constantly breached and I was constantly reporting these threats that I was getting, but nobody was doing anything. Um, Unfortunately, I ended up having nervous breakdown from the constant threats, and I did try to take my own life. Not because I wanted to die, but because I needed to be away from him and his threats, and because I had been promised by all the domestic violence organisations that the safety order would make sure that he didn't threaten me. And obviously that didn't happen. So at that point, I'd lost my business. And I had nothing. Like, you know, everything that he was saying that he would do to me, he was being allowed to do. Um, and at that point, then I contacted a superintendent in Nace Garda Station by the name of Oliver Henry. And I said to him, "I need to go back to court to get something added to this safety order because it's not doing what I was told it was supposed to do. And I'm doing exactly as the judge told me to do. And the thing is, he's being allowed to constantly threaten me." And he said to me, "All right, hold on there for a second." And within 10 minutes, I got a call from a Sergeant Finian Dempsey. And this was the first time that I was introduced to this man, who has caused a lot of damage and trauma to me. He asked me to come in to Kildare Town and to take a statement of all of the breaches. And I said, but I've already reported them. And he went, yeah, but we're going to do them as a group in a statement. And I said, okay. And I said, what will happen then? He said, I will send that statement to the DPP and they will decide on how many charges of breaching your safety order that, you know, they will charge him with, and he'll be arrested and charged with it. And I said, great. So I went in and I did the statements. My son also went in because he was given some of the threats to give me. So he did a witness statement. And then this Sergeant Finian Dempsey said, right, I'm going to send that off to the DPP and then I'll phone you when I hear back from them. So that was okay. Left that with him. 6 months later, I get a call from him and he said to me, there's a court hearing in March 2019 for Naas Court to do with the breaches of your safety order. So that was all 32 and any more that I could think of and my son could remember. So I was all prepared for this. Then the night before, I get a call from a junior Garda telling me, oh, by the way, Susan, there's only one breach being heard tomorrow. And I went, yeah, but I did over 30 in the statements. He said, yeah, but Martin Walker, the superintendent, decided that there was only one to be heard in the court. And I said, but I thought it was the DPP. And he went, yeah, but Martin Walker decided. So, you know, at this point, I'm still trusting as much as I can the Gardaí to do their job, and what I was told they were going to do. So I turned up for the hearing and it was a setup, this hearing. It never went to the DPP. The guards actually have the power to arrest somebody under a court safety order. DPP don't have to be involved in this. So straight away, I realised I was being told lies. Then all of a sudden, then there was a female Garda called Rachel Lonergan, and she was there. And I was asking them, hold on, what's going on here? I've done a full statement of, you know, over 30 threats to kill me, you know, not just I don't like you anymore or anything like that. And I said, so what's going on here? And I really felt in that court hearing, the judge didn't even know because he didn't have anything in front of him. He said to me, sorry, where did you get this safety order? And I said, I got it from you 2 years ago. And I knew then that it was a setup. So the two court Gardaí, and one of them is now actually a barrister, Brian Jacob, I think is his name. When we were leaving, because it was thrown out, you know, it was a complete, this was a setup to get him off it. He was there with his solicitor. I was told not to bring a solicitor because the state solicitor would be there for me. So that was another lie. So it's just lie after lie after lie. Never went to the DPP. All of these lies, you know, and by the time you realise it, you're sitting in the witness box and you know exactly what's going down. It's like Groundhog Day. And as we were leaving the court, the abuser, my ex-husband, his solicitor and the two court Gardaí were doing big high fives and man hugs as we were leaving. You know, they weren't even hiding it. It was like right in front of us. So then I decided that I would go to GSOC and I said, right, I've had enough of all of this. This is just a complete shit show. While I was doing the statements in 2018 of the breaches to my safety order, the Garda I was doing it with, this Sergeant Finian Dempsey, at one point, I said to him that he regularly rings me up and tells me I can do fuck all about the violent abuse that he did to me, because the courts don't want to know about historic abuse. And Finian Dempsey stopped during that statement and said to me, that's actually wrong. And it was his ego that was he's, you know, because my abuser used to say that the guards are stupid, etc., etc. So he said, you know, no, that's technically not right. Sexual abuse and serious assaults causing harm have no time limit on them for reporting. So if you want to come in and do statements on those particular crimes, I can't do the financial abuse, the other physical abuse, the minor assaults, all of those things. But if he sexually abused and raped you, and if he seriously assaulted you, I can take statements on those. And he said, if you give me a heads up, I will get a team down from Dublin, a Garda team that are used to and experienced in taking statements of abuse. And I said, great, I'll think about that and I'll get back to you. And of course, that was the year before. That when this shit show went down and this fake court hearing went down, afterwards, I said to myself, do you know what? I'm going to take him up on his offer. And I rang him and I said, Finian, do you remember saying to me, you know, to come in and do that? And he said, yeah. And I said, great. So can you get that team organised with An Garda Síochána to come down, the ones that are experienced in taking these statements? And I will arrange to come in then and do the full statements of everything he did to me over the 20 years. I said, it's going to be difficult, but I think the time has come when it has to be done. And he said to me, what team? And I said, you know, the Garda people that are experienced in taking these statements. I never said that. And I said, right, okay, so can you take it? Oh, well, I'm busy. All of a sudden, he went cold on me. And I said to him, right, so can you arrange for me to come in and make these statements? Now, don't forget, these are 20 years worth of serious assaults and sexual abuse and rape. And he said to me, but sure, if you're doing, getting your messages, going shopping, you can call in and just say it to the guy at the counter and he'll take the statement. And I went, you do realize it's going to be a lot of hours. This is not just me going in to report a stolen bicycle or my dog is lost. And I just couldn't understand his attitude, but I pinned him down. And eventually then he gave me an appointment to come in. And that was at the end of March 2019. A friend of mine was supposed to come with me for that statement because at this stage I was obviously getting vibes that these pricks were lying to me constantly, and this was a bit of a cover up. And unfortunately, she let me down at the last minute because she had to go somewhere. And but I spoke to her before I went in and a couple of other close friends, and I went in and I spoke to this Sergeant Finian Dempsey who was there, and this young Garda, Rachel Lonergan, was there as well. And Finian Dempsey explained to me that we're going to do the serious assaults causing harm first. So there's two parts to this case. And we're going to do the serious assaults causing harm first today. And then you can have a week's break and come back and do the sexual assaults and rape. And I said, right, okay. And I sat with them for 5.5 hours. And I went through everything, all of the serious assaults causing harm. I was told I couldn't report the minor assaults, which were, there was hundreds of those. I have since learned that when you go in and you report domestic violence, they want to know everything, because the DPP need a proper picture so that they can see what type of individual that they will be dealing with and getting off the streets to make Ireland safe, you know. But they had cherry picked, you know, that I could only report 2 types of crimes. But I did those 5.5 hours. It was really hard. It was really long. And it was really draining. But, you know, it had come to that stage where I had to start doing something a bit more, you know, intense. So at the end of it, I said, okay, can I have a copy of that statement? And he said, oh, no. In these types of matters, you only get them on the morning of the hearing, if there is a hearing. If there is a trial, if there are charges, blah, 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 you will get a copy of the statement on the morning of the hearing. And I believed him, because why wouldn't I? He's a guard, you know, I've never been in trouble in my life. And, you know, you believe, that's what you're brought up to believe, that these people are there to help and protect you as victims of crimes. So I had no reason not to believe him. He said to me at the end, if you remember any other serious assaults, because obviously there's a lot here, get back to me within 48 hours and I'll add it to your statement. Okay. And I said, okay. And I phoned him the next day and I said, no, I can't remember anymore. Don't want to remember anymore. And I think we've got enough there. You know, there was 9 serious assaults causing harm that ended up with serious injuries.
What
Now,
was the worst injuries that you actually got from him with the serious assaults?
So the worst one would have been my spine being fractured. I have loss of hearing in my right ear. I have retinal damage in my right eye because he used to frequently punch my head quite hard, and knocked me out a few times. I've had fractured teeth. I've there's just been a list of them. Honestly, there's about 30 different injuries. And if I talk about them too much, I'll only cry and I won't be able to do this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've had a lot of serious injuries that cause me
Yeah.
pain today, you know.
So
On
let's go on to what happened after that. Did it go to court? And
No. So basically, after doing that statement of 5.5 hours, I spoke to my friend who was supposed to come with me. Now, her father was a Garda. He's now passed away, but you know, she kind of knows a little bit how these work. And she said to me, "How do you feel going back to do the sexual abuse statement?" And I said, "I don't feel like going back because they were actually quite unprofessional." This young female Garda kept saying to me, "You do realise that if there are any charges out of this, that everyone's going to know in the town and it's going to be on the radio and it's going to be on the television." And I had to say to her after 20 minutes, "You wouldn't mind zipping it because I'm trying to relay to you, you know, serious assaults that happen to me, and you're sitting there with your arms folded and legs crossed, chewing bubblegum, and rolling your eyes when I'm talking and saying things that are really off-putting." So I said, "If you wouldn't mind, please stop saying things." Um, and anyway,
can you remember her name? Her name?
yeah, Rachel Lonigan.
That was Rachel Lonigan. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And they're all still in Kildare Town Garda Station. So anyway, I spoke to my friend and I said to her, "I don't feel like going back and doing the sexual abuse and the rape statements with them because they were horrific to deal with, really. Unless you're reporting something else, that they just didn't have the experience." So she said to me, "Well, look, let's see if we can find a sexual abuse unit of An Garda Síochána." There were no DPS units at the time, which are units that are set up now for people that have that want to report domestic abuse, etc., etc. They're supposedly experienced in this. So anyway, we found a sexual abuse unit in Ballymun Garda Station that was ran by a guy called Detective Carl McSweeney. And I rang him and I said to him, "Would you mind taking a sexual abuse statement for me?" And he said, "Yeah, 100%. What's the problem?" And I said, "Well, the abuser is ex-senior military policeman, and all of the guards in Kildare are his buddies and the superintendent, and he knows all of them, and he knows them all over the country, you know, from his time. Because back in the day, he's 66 years old. Back in the day, when people didn't normally get leaving certs because it was expensive to go on to secondary school, a lot of them wanted to be guards. And the only way you could bypass not having a leaving cert was to go into the military police for a couple of years. And then you could go straight into An Garda Síochána and you wouldn't need your leaving cert. So he is of an age that he would have known a lot of guys that would have gone via the army into An Garda Síochána. So they would be, a lot of them would be senior Gardaí. So they'd have a lot of power behind them, etc. And this is where the web of connections, you know, started with him. Plus, he did a few favors in the Lebanon over the years. A couple of soldiers, one shot another soldier, and I think he ended up in a wheelchair. That guy who shot that guy had a family that were, you know, had a business in the town. And so An Garda Síochána have to go to the Lebanon if there are any, you know, legal issues to do with things like that.
Yeah.
And they're part of the investigation. And my husband would have been the investigating officer for the military police in a couple of those things and covered over a few crimes. Okay. So anyway, that's his kind of connections in all of this. So I contacted Carl McSweeney, and I said to him, "I've already done the serious assaults causing harm, but I've also had a safety order which was breached 32 times. I lost my business and everything because of this. So I just don't trust them in Kildare Town." He said, "It's a pity you didn't come to me in the first place. I could have done the whole case for you." And I said, "Well, I didn't know. I'm learning as I'm going along here. We don't, you know, learn how to report crimes when we're in school. We tend to just know that we trust the guards or the police, because that's what they're there for." So he said to me, "Look, what I can do for you is that if you come up to me and I'll do the sexual abuse part of your statement with you, I will contact Sergeant Finian Dempsey and I will say to him, listen, it's not that Susan has anything against you." He said, "Just in case there's any repercussions for me," he said that he would ring and, you know, say that she's done that with me and I'm sending it on to you because you've already got a file open with the serious assaults causing harm statement in it that Susan has done. So, I'm going to send this on to you. And he said, and then you should be all right. And he said, what I'll do, Susan, for you is I'll make sure it's on the pulse system before you get back to Kildare when you've done that statement with me. And that way, if there's any hanky panky, and these were his words, if there is any hanky panky, it won't be coming from my end. So he knew what we were dealing with here, and he was doing his best to try to help me in that situation. So I went up to him, completely different experience. He was professional. He was normal. I don't want people crying all over the floor when I'm talking about my abuse that I suffered, but he was respectful compared to the guards in Kildare town. I did the statement with him. It was about 4 hours. I had no medical evidence, no witnesses, nothing. So I didn't have much hope. I actually didn't even want to report the sexual abuse. It was only that Sergeant Finian Dempsey kind of talked me into doing it. He said it will just give your case a bit more weight. But I didn't realise what they were planning behind the scenes. So the statement went down to him. He added it to the file. It went onto the pulse system. Carl McSweeney, the detective there, rang me. He said to me, yeah, I've put everything on the pulse system. I've spoken to Sergeant Finian Dempsey, and your statement that you did is on his way to him, and it's going to be put in the file. I then got a call from Finian Dempsey, and that was within probably 24 hours of him receiving that statement. And he said to me, oh, Susan, so we weren't good enough for you to do the second part of your statement with. And I said, no, Finian, it's not like that. It's just because it was more sensitive. I felt like I needed somebody a bit more experienced to take it. I was desperately trying, to not fall out with them. Do you know that type of way? That's how afraid I was, that they were going to do something. So anyway, he said, Grand, I've got that now. It's in the file. So I'll start my investigations. And can you pick up notes from the refuge? And can you go here? And can you go? I was actually picking up, the evidence for him, which I found out since that's not the way you do things. You don't get the victim to drive around the country picking up evidence and stuff like that. So he asked me to do a request form for all my medical records, because obviously they were supporting the injuries that I had suffered with all of the hospitals that I had attended. Well, there was 3 hospitals. So I signed that permission form for him to get my medical records. I spoke to him every couple of weeks for roughly a year while he was doing the investigations. He called my son in to do a witness statement, because my son had witnessed a lot of the serious assaults that were done to me. He didn't know anything about the sexual abuse, apart from the fact that he used to shout how my pussy belonged to him around the house. But he didn't know, he didn't know I was being raped, etc. So I actually had no medical evidence of the rape. I had no witnesses for the rapes. I only had witnesses and medical evidence and stuff like that for the serious assaults causing harm part. And every time I spoke to him for that year, we talked about the 2 parts of my statement. And, the serious assaults causing harm and the sexual abuse and rape that I did in Ballymun Station. On the day that he handed it, apparently, to the district office, which I thought was a completely different building. It's not. It's just upstairs where the superintendent hangs out. And he said to me, he rang me and he said, Susan, I'm just handing in the file with all the statements in it and all the medical evidence and everything else. I'm handing it into the district office. So I'm just ringing you to tell you that it will go from there to the DPP. And then as soon as I hear anything, I will get back to you if there's any charges. And I said, right, that's great. And I said, can I just confirm with you that the statement I did with you 5.5 hours of the 9 serious assaults causing harm that I did with you in March 2019 is in that file? And he said, yes, Mammy. And I said, why are you calling me Mammy? He said, because you're always checking on me. And I said, yeah, you kind of pretty fucked up my life by allowing my safety order to be breached 32 times. So yeah, I am going to kind of check, okay? Because I have to make sure that you're not up to anything. So I said, right, and is the other statement in there from Ballymun Garda Station Sexual Abuse Unit? Yes, that's in there. And I said, okay, and my son's witness statement to the serious assaults causing harm? And he said, yes, that's in there. And I said, and all the medical evidence? Yes, that's in there. So then I could relax. But while I was having my safety order breached over and over again, I used to talk to a lady, she's a civilian victim support worker in Naas Garda station. She works for An Garda Síochána, but she's not a guard. And I used to call her when I was, you know, getting the death threats. And she used to say to me, "Oh God, Susan, I don't know what to say to you. I can only say something to the superintendent, but I can't do anything about it because I'm not actually a Garda." But I did find her supportive. So after this file was supposedly sent to the district office and then the DPP, I rang Margaret after a couple of weeks and I said to her, "I've just got a feeling that everything isn't 100%. I don't know why, whether it's just my, you know, sense that I can pick something up." And she said to me, "Okay, look, I'll tell you what," she said, "there's a girl that works in here with me who is a Garda and she has access to the PULSE system, but she's on maternity leave. So what I'm going to do is contact her and ask her to just check the PULSE system just to make sure everything is on there." This is when I learned more about the PULSE system. I didn't really understand it fully until this point. And she said, if everything had been sent to the DPP, it will be on the PULSE system. So she said, whenever you report any type of crime, they put it on the PULSE system, a lost bicycle, whatever it is, it's on the PULSE system. So all your statements should be on there. And then 2 days later, I received a call from this girl. Her name was Aisling Bracken. And I could hear by the tone of her voice that everything wasn't as it should have been. And she said to me, "Susan, I'm so sorry." She said, "All that's on here is the sexual abuse statement from Carl McSweeney in Ballymun station." And I'll never forget that day because I had done so much. I'd done so much to make sure that that didn't happen. And I remember sitting there and the floor just moved from underneath my feet because it just didn't feel real because I had done so much to make sure that they didn't do this. Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
So um, she was really nice and she said to me, "Susan, that 5.5 hour statement isn't on the PULSE system in any form." And I said to her, "What do you mean by that?" She said, "It's just not on here. There's nothing here to say that you've reported 9 serious assaults causing harm." But she said, "Can you do me a favor? Can you ring the DPP and speak to the victims liaison department?" And she said, "They can't talk to you about the details of the case because when you report crimes that happen to you, under Irish law and under the state and the justice system, you're classed as a witness, not a victim. So you have no one to talk to about your case apart from An Garda Síochána. And if they're doing what they were doing to me, it meant I had nobody to talk to. So you can't ring a private solicitor for help because they're not allowed to intervene in a state trial. The DPP are supposed to be representing the country, but you're classed as a witness. So you've got no one to go to with all of this." I knew that if, you know, when I found out this information, who was I going to go to? Was I going to ring the guard that destroyed my statement? No, of course I wasn't. You know, who was I going to report this to? The guards? No, because it was the guards that were doing this, you know. And she said, "Just ring them anyway in the DPP." And the guy I spoke to called David, he was very nice. And I told him everything that had happened. I was really upset. And I said to him, "Can you confirm that the serious assault statement that I did of 5.5 hours of the 9 serious assaults, that you didn't get that?" And all he could say was yes and no to me. I mean, this is how crazy this whole system is. And he went, "No, I didn't get that." And I said, "Okay, did you get the sexual abuse statement from Ballymun?" "Yes, I got that." And I said, "Did you get my son's statement?" "Yeah, got that." And he said, "We've actually sent instructions already to Kildare Town with charges. So I don't know why they haven't contacted you yet." And of course, I had to keep quiet about what I had found out from the guards. So they didn't know that I knew at this stage. And I rang Sergeant Finian Dempsey. And it took me a couple of weeks to get him. So I had to keep this all to myself. I'd no one I could talk to about finding out that my statement was destroyed. And he rings me one day and he says, "Oh, yeah, Susan, hi, yeah, I meant to ring you there last week. Yeah, there's 3 charges there that have come back from the DPP." And I said, "That's fantastic. That's great news." I said, "So are the 3 charges of the sexual abuse statement or the serious assault statement I did with you in March 2019? Or is it a mixture of the two?" He said, "Oh, I don't know." And I said, do you normally ring people to tell them that there's serious charges that are going to court and you don't know what the charges are for? And he said, oh, I don't have the file. And I said, that's okay. I'll hold on and I'll wait for you to find the file. And he said, what do you want to know for anyway? And I said, because I'm going to be going into court. I need to know what he's been charged with. Is it serious assaults causing harm? I did with you. Or is it the other? Is it the sexual abuse? And he said, look, I don't have time for this. I'm busy. And he cut me off. So you see the way I didn't tell him that I knew, and he was still lying to me. He was still lying by saying, I don't know which ones he's been charged with, the statement I did with him or the sexual abuse statement. So anyway, he went off and I tried to get him for about a good week after that. And eventually he called me back again. He went, yeah, Susan, just to tell you there, it's 3 counts of rape. And I said, so not one of the serious assaults causing harm? And he went, no, they didn't choose any of them. Still lying to me. And you can imagine how I felt at this point. And I said to him, so not one of the 9 serious assaults causing harm that I did with you? He said, no. He said, but I tell you what you can do. You can put it in a letter, just write a letter, hand it in to me, asking the DPP why they didn't choose any of the 9 serious assaults causing harm, where one of them ended up with my spine being fractured. I couldn't understand. I was kind of saying to him, I don't understand why the DPP didn't choose any of those 9 serious assaults, because there was supporting evidence, there was witnesses, and there was medical evidence. And the thing was, the DPP never got that statement. That's why they didn't choose any of them. And when he said to me, you can write a letter asking them, and I'll send it through Garda internal mail to the DPP, and then we'll wait to hear back from them. And that's when I lost my cool. And I said, but that's not going to fucking happen, is it, Finian? And he went, what do you mean? And I said, because you didn't send that fucking statement, you lying bastard. And the first thing that came out of his mouth was, how did you find that out? And I said, right, I'm going to GSOC. And I put the phone down and then I went to GSOC.
What happened then? Let's fast track it a little bit then. After you went to GSOC, there were some other problems, I guess. You found out that the statements from your son gave, again, they give a completely different account to what he actually said.
Yeah, they wrote
Also,
a fake one. They destroyed his statement and they wrote a fake one, because for that 2 years or 3 years leading up to the trial, so the trial was booked for the 11th of July in the Dublin Criminal Courts, the 11th of July 2022. I found out all of this in 2020, that he had only been arrested and charged with 3 counts of rape, and with strict instructions and limitations on what I could talk about in the trial. I was told I couldn't talk about any of the other abuse that he did to me. So it was just going to be 3 counts of rape from my husband with no other backup, that he was violent or anything like that. And I just said to them straight away, I said, listen, I'm not interested. I'm not going to court, nothing. We were looking for copies of our statements for 3 years. And we kept getting emails saying, yeah, they're down in the Garda station. And then we would drive down and there would be nothing there and no one would know what we were talking about. So we realize now that that was because they knew that we would have found out. So just before the trial, my son eventually got a copy of his statement. And as soon as he opened it, he was in the middle of doing his psychology degree in Maynooth University. And he opened it and he said, Mum, that's not my statement. The first line was psychiatric illnesses, saying his name. My name is Sean Allen, and I've got XYZ, which he hasn't got. So straight away, they were discrediting him, and every serious assault that he had explained in that statement was removed. So they basically destroyed his statement and wrote a fake statement.
Let's go on now to where you went after GSOC. You were really getting nowhere, I think, with them also. What happened? What happened? Your former husband, when it went to court, what exactly happened there?
Well, it didn't go to court, because I told the Gardaí in 2020, when all this happened, I wasn't interested in going in on 3 counts of rape. I said it'll be thrown out on the first day. I'm married to the guy, and I'm not allowed to talk about the violence that he committed towards me. So I'm not going in under those. And I said, and anyway, there has been Garda corruption and interference, perverting the course of justice, whatever you want to label it. I am not going into a court in this country under those circumstances. And that's it. I'm not interested in getting involved. So they said to me, oh, would you go and do the statement again, the 5.5 hour statement again? When I went to GSOC, Sergeant Finian Dempsey said that that statement were only notes. They weren't statements, which is 100% incorrect and false. But that was his way of getting out of it. But then I remembered what that Garda on maternity leave said to me when she said to me, Susan, don't forget, these are not on the pulse system in any form. Now I knew what she meant. So notes, if you go in and report something and you haven't made an actual official statement, those notes will go on to the pulse system. So if those 5.5 hours of full detail of 9 serious assaults causing harm crimes were notes, that would have been on the pulse system, but it wasn't on the pulse system.
Let's go to the final part of this, I guess. When you felt absolutely lost, like in the system at this stage, the court system had failed you, Garda Síochána definitely had failed you, and you contacted the Justice Minister and you contacted Simon Harris.
Oh, all the way through this whole thing, I was contacting the Justice Minister, the Taoiseach, anyone that I could think of for help for this. And actually, my local TD, Sean O'Friel, who was the Camcaller in the Dáil for a long time, I have to give it to him. He did try for 2 years to help. And you know, he looked for meetings with Drew Harris, with Helen McEntee. Helen McEntee asked Sean O'Friel if I could write out exactly what happened and type it out, and he would hand it to her. But all I got was, we are of a political stance and we cannot legally get involved in the DPP or on Garda Síochána or Drew Harris or the
And
Commissioner.
how do you feel about that? Because I think you were telling me that when you send some of these emails to these individuals you just mentioned, you actually got a response from them. What was the response? And as well as that, I guess it's a double question here, but how do you feel about the response, first of all? And the second thing, like, about how badly the system let you down?
Well, when I discovered in April 2023 that the GSOC investigator, Gabriel Crystal, who is an ex-British cop and now works for the Justice Department for Children in Ireland, he was the one that supposedly investigated my destroyed statement of 5.5 hours. He was the one that rang me after 2 days and said, no, Susan, it wasn't a statement, it was notes. And I said, no, it was a statement. And, you know, that's it. End of. When I found out that he lied in April 2023 about contacting, so obviously the detective in Ballymun Sexual Abuse Unit was a witness to me doing this statement. He had a discussion with Sergeant Finian Dempsey about this 5.5 hour statement, which was why he was sending the sexual abuse statement to him in Kildare town. So he was a witness. Then we had Ashling, who was the Garda on maternity leave. She was a witness. Then we have Margaret. So all of these people worked for Garda Síochána and they were willing to be witnesses. Then I had then a civilian witness to me doing this statement. Gabriel Crystal, the investigator for GSOC, told me he had spoken at length with all 4 witnesses and that there was no evidence there that I had done a statement of 5.5 hours. Carl McSweeney rang me in April 2023 to see how I was and how the GSOC investigation went. And I said to him, well, you should know because you spoke to the guy. And he went, nobody contacted me from GSOC. And I went, okay.
Wow.
He said, nobody contacted me. I was waiting, but I thought that maybe you weren't going ahead with it. Then I chased up the other 3 witnesses and they weren't contacted either. So I found out the GSOC investigator lied. Helen McEntee was on maternity leave in April 2023, and Simon Harris was in her place, taking her seat until she come back. And I emailed Helen, and I said, I've just discovered, and I kept her updated with everything, and she just kept fobbing me off the whole time. All I got was an email back saying, I'm so sorry for what's happened to you, but I can't intervene. That's all I got. So I sent an email saying, Helen, I've now discovered that the GSOC investigator has lied in his investigation into my destroyed statement. And Simon Harris replied to me and he said to me, Susan, this is very serious. I'm completely aware that it's serious. So I'm going to look for an inquiry. I'm going to look for an investigation from the Gardaí, blah, 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 blah. And I said, great, I'll wait to hear from you. Helen McEntee returned to the office. He was probably kicked out on his ear. And she wrote to me straight away. And I said to her, what's happening with the inquiry? And she said, oh, no, sorry, we can't get involved. That was that. So nobody, we've written to every senator, every minister, every TD, the Taoiseach, the president, you name them, we've written to them, explaining all of this. And we've got an overview document, which I had sent to you, of everything that's happened. And yes, there is a
Yeah.
lot in it, but
Yeah.
this is the thing. And what they like it when there's a lot in it, because you're more likely as a victim to go, do you know what, I can't do this anymore, because it is exhausting. It's a 24/7 job to, keep the paper trail going. And it's
Yeah,
still
I've
happening
read.
today.
Yeah, I've read all the documents and of course, like it's amazing that you put everything together so well, right? I mean, again, it's looking at the file. It's unreal. It's unreal what you've been through. Again, many of the things you didn't speak about here today, which is again just the injuries and everything else that he actually did to you.
Yeah.
But it's unbelievable that we have politicians in Ireland that are clearly connected at the hip with the Garda Síochána and the way they actually protect the Garda Síochána. It is me personally, I
100%.
believe that the Garda Síochána is the biggest criminal entity in Europe.
100%.
And I look at the murders, the rapes, the abuse, the tortures. It is absolutely scandalous. I have a video that I got now and trying to verify it at the moment, where there's members of the Garda Síochána involved in a drugs transaction, and there's a whole load of dope on the table, and there's members of the Garda Síochána, known criminals, all sitting around again trying to figure out financially how they were going to make the most money from this, and it just never ends. I mean, it just
But
never ends.
the top guy in Naas Garda Station drug squad, okay, used to sell the drugs that he confiscated to my sister's husband, who was a motorbike mechanic. Okay. And I went over there several times and I seen a Garda bike outside, but he used to service their bikes, their motorbikes. And that's how he got connected with the guy from the drug squad. And whatever drugs were confiscated, he gave them to Andy Boothman and he sold them, because Andy Boothman and my sister are now retired, living full time in Croatia. They've got approximately 6 properties with no mortgages. Tell me a motorbike mechanic that can do that at 50 years of age and own 6 properties.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, listen, thank you very much, Susan. You've become a really good friend of mine over the last few weeks. I know we speak quite a bit,
Thank you.
absolutely horrified for what actually is after happening to you, and disgusted again with our government. Disgusted the way they leave the victims and give them no support. In many
No.
cases, they make the situation even worse because they come down even very, very hard on the victims. And we live in a very, very sad, pathetic country.
I'm living in my house at the moment. I'm on disability allowance. I've lost everything. Anything I had left after I left that abuser has been destroyed, because of An Garda Síochána and what they've done to me. Like, they've completely destroyed my life. My house is falling down around me. I don't have the money to keep it maintained. I can get no help from anybody. And this is all because of the Gardaí. I had 3 years where there was no central heating in my home, and only for St. Vincent de Paul getting me a new central heating boiler, I would still have no central heating and hot water. While the Garda that did this are down in Kildare Town Garda Station, and they don't have to go without central heating. They don't have to suffer like that. What these people have done to what was left of my life, and don't forget, I was a victim of crimes. I wasn't an alleged criminal. I was a victim that went to do what that we're being told every day on the radio in Ireland, on the television, go and report to An Garda Síochána. They dress up in purple Barney dinosaur costumes every October, and they have a stand in the town in Kildare town with anti-domestic violence and all this kind of stuff. And a Garda will dress up as Barney the dinosaur. And I'm sitting up here going, hold on, I did that. I reported it, and look what you've done to me. And I have to say, Kieran, thank you so much for setting this up, because it's a very, very lonely road to be on when you're suffering from Garda crimes and corruption. Before 9 years ago, when this all started happening to me, I probably would have been skeptical. But you've given people a platform to speak, because we're not allowed to speak, we're silenced. And it just makes that even more horrible. And we've gone to everyone for help, and they've all ignored us. And, you know, someone said to me the other day, if they ever did apologise to you, what would you do? And I said, I'd hear the apology, and then I'd tell them to stick it up their arse. They've had thousands of opportunities to communicate with me and apologise for what they've done. And they just, you know, write me off because they say she's got no money, she's got no solicitor, fuck her and her son, you know?
Yeah. Well, listen, big hugs. And,
Thank you.
you know, let's talk again soon. And, you know, I hope and I pray that we can get enough of these cases together and we can file a class action lawsuit against the Irish state and against everyone that's actually been named. And again, this cannot continue. The abuse, the murders, the rapes, the embezzlements, the racketeering, the drug dealing, the drug smuggling. I mean, you can go on forever. I mean, it must end. Ireland is the most corrupt country on the planet. We must get that message out, and we must get justice for all the victims, including you, Susan. And on that
Yes.
note, let's talk again real soon.
Okay. Thank you, Kieran. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.